Welcome everyone to another installment of Gardens and Grub, all things food. We're going to talk for 20 minutes about a delicious ingredient I'm sure you've all have sampled before. Feel free to raise your hand to ask a question or type it in the chat box or message us on Facebook. So welcome back everyone. I know this week we said we were going to talk about fertilizer and I promptly forgot and pulled some of my honey collection and then remembered. So next week, I promise we'll do fertilizer, I promise. But this week, we're gonna talk honey. This is honey that was actually pulled from our hives at Briggs Avenue Community Garden a couple of weeks ago by Mark Powers, our fabulous master beekeeper. If you are curious about bees and you would like to get a little experience with them before you spend a bunch of money trying to start bees, come and see us first because there's a lot to learn and beekeeping is not an easy hobby. It can be really wonderful and super rewarding, but it's also very hot and sweaty and it's a lot of hard work. But it's totally fascinating. I'm endlessly fascinated about bees. So please feel free to ask any questions about bees or gardening or anything that you want. But honey is one of my favorite ingredients. I love honey. And I'm not just talking like honey as a general thing, like, you know, the little container that you get in the grocery store. A lot of times you don't know where that has come from. And so you have to be kind of careful where you get your honey and what's in it. China is the largest producer of honey. About 26% of the world's honey crop comes from China. And often when it is shipped over, sometimes it can be adulterated and that can come from anywhere. It's very easy to adulterate honey with high fructose corn syrup, and it's very hard to tell. So if you get your honey locally from a local beekeeper, you know that the bees are healthy and you're supporting that beekeeper. And also you have the opportunity to have some monofloral honeys, which we'll talk about. This is considered wildflower honey. That means that I don't know what they ate. I just know that they ate flower nectar and they brought it back to the hive. And so whenever you see wildflower honey, it's a mix of flowers that are all over the place. So, and then there's monofloral honeys where the bees are just eating one thing. So we'll talk about that when we look at some other honeys in this talk. Honey is actually carbohydrates for bees. So their fat and protein come from pollen and their carbohydrates come from honey. Honey does not spoil. It is below 18% moisture. It's a super saturated solution. That means that it has more, it has the maximum amount of sugar dissolved into water. And the way that they make that happen is that bees go from flower to flower to flower, and they harvest nectar by sucking it up through their proboscis into their honey stomach, which is like just below their regular stomach where they eat and digest food. And it's like this little transfer pocket. And they fly from flower to flower to flower to flower, and they gain about 50% of their body weight in honey and in nectar. And then they fly back to the hive and they actually regurgitate it to their sisters in the hive because all the girls do the work. Whenever you see a bee foraging or a bee getting water or a bee on a tree extracting sap to make propolis, that's always a girl bee. And you can always tell if it's a bee if it has fur on it. So if you can't really tell if it's a bee or a wasp, especially if it's in a fall, because there's a certain kind of wasp that's about the same size as a bee. You can always tell a bee from a wasp because a bee, even whether it's a honeybee or another species of bee, bees all have hair. They look like little flying stuffed animals and they're absolutely adorable. So that's one definite way that you can tell the difference. If you find that you have bees anywhere around your house, you can always call a local beekeeper and they will come and get them for you. Bees are expensive. Bees are about $125 for a 3-pound box, and people spend a lot of money on bees when they buy them, when they need to expand their colonies or if they've lost a colony. So beekeepers will definitely take the opportunity to come and get free money just hanging off the side of your house. So don't ever exterminate bees. And usually a lot of the exterminators will suggest that you call a local beekeeper because we want to try to keep bees on the planet, because 1 out of every 3 bites of food that we eat is due to pollination. And that's what I was talking about when the bee goes from flower to flower to flower. It drinks in nectar and into its honey stomach, and those little furs, the little hairs all over its body are negatively charged and the pollen is positively charged, or vice versa, but it's like a magnet, and it sticks to their little body and they fly around and they go from flower to flower to flower and they fill up, and then they take all that pollen and they smooth it off their body and tuck it down into these little upward facing hairs. I call them pollen baskets, kind of where our thighs would be. And then they fly back to the hive and they offload everything right at the door, basically. And then they go back out to fly around and get some more nectar. So a bee in the summer will live only about 5 weeks. She'll literally work herself to death. And during her entire life, she will only create 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey. So that's why, to me, honey is precious. It's precious. Every time I take a bite of it, I think of all of the bees that it took to make this much honey. It's a lot of bees. Like, they had to visit, I think it's 2 million flowers to make 1 pound of honey. So that's a lot of work. That's why honey is expensive. So if you go to a local beekeeper and they want to charge you, say $20 for a pint of honey, that may be because it's a monofloral honey. And the way that works, so let's talk a little bit about monofloral honey. So wildflower honey is when you don't really know what you're getting, because there's lots of things blooming all at the same time. So when you've got lots of things blooming all at the same time, the hive will decide through dancing. The scouts will go out and come back and then dance to convince their sisters of where the best source of flowers are. Bees prefer to eat from trees. They have flower fidelity, which means they're going to dance and convince the rest of the hive which one is the best source of food. So most of the hive will go to one tree. Trees really are what bees prefer, or big fields of something like clover or almonds or cotton. When there's tons and tons and tons of flowers of all one kind, they're guaranteed to be able to bring back a lot of nectar and to not have to fly as far to get there. So it's sort of like an insurance policy that they get enough food, because every day matters, because they're trying to build up their carbohydrates to store over the winter, because when it's too cold, they can't come outside. If it's cloudy and raining, or it's below 65 degrees, bees stay in their hive. And so they need to be able to make sure that they have enough to survive the winter, which is why they're working so hard. So wildflower honey, there's lots of things blooming. And so that's why this beautiful honey, we don't know what it is, but it's probably tulip poplar and some dead nettle and all sorts of different things. So that's that. I want to show you one of my favorite honeys that I get a 3-gallon to 5-gallon bucket of every couple of years. And it's the one that I eat on toast, and the one I usually give most of this away because it's so precious. Like, we don't sell anything at Briggs. We give it away or we share it. And so I might have a little bit of this sometimes, but mainly we give it to funders and the gardeners and people who do nice things for us. And so it's, I think, extra special because you can't buy it. So this one you can buy, and it's a monofloral mesquite honey. And look, it naturally, as soon as it comes out of the hive, it actually naturally crystallizes, because there's so much pollen in it that it seeds these crystals, and it comes from a very dry environment in the Sonoran Desert. So it's very easy to dry out. So when the bees, actually, the way they dry out the honey is they pass from sister to sister. They will pass from honey stomach to honey stomach, and they will blow bubbles with it. And what it does is it starts to enzymatically break it down from the starches into sugars, which are sweeter, because the longer a carbohydrate chain is, the more starchy it will taste rather than sweet. And so this enzymatic action breaks down these long chains and turns them into monosaccharides, fructose and glucose. And that's the sugary bit that you taste. So, and they blow bubbles with it, and then they fan it to dry it out. So that dries it below 18% moisture. And what that does is it allows it sometimes to crystallize, but it prevents anything from growing in it. So even though there's yeasts and spores and stuff that are in natural honey, this is not an environment that they can live in. So that's why honey doesn't spoil. As long as it's capped and kept dry, it will not attract more water. But anything that's sugary like this, just like when you, in a moist environment, all sugars are hydrophilic, or hygroscopic is another word for that. And basically they attract water towards themselves. And you'll see this, like, if you leave out a sugar bowl, it'll get like a crust on the top of it in a moist environment. In a humid environment like we're in, that happens. But this comes from a very dry environment. And so it's very easy to dry this honey out. And it's just super rich in pollen, and it's got a very high viscosity, which means that it's like almost gluey rather than runny. So I love this honey because it's like creamed honey. It spreads really well. It's easy to measure when you do baking. It comes from Africanized bees, which are an amazing story all on their own. People are afraid of Africanized bees, but they don't succumb to the sicknesses that the European honeybees do that we know, and we tend. So yes, they're spicier, but they create stuff like this. So it's pretty spectacular. The reason that you can obtain a monofloral honey like this is that when mesquites bloom, they bloom a couple of times a year, and different types of mesquite bloom at different times of the year. However, there's not a lot of other things blooming in the Sonoran Desert. There's not a lot of plants. I mean, you got cacti and things, but you don't have tons and tons and tons of different kinds of plants blooming all the time like you do here in North Carolina. So it's very easy to, when you know the mesquite is going to bloom, you put a queen excluder, which is a little grate that like all the workers can get up and down into all the hives. But if you put an excluder on, the queen can't get up there because she lays her weight in eggs every day. So she has a big abdomen and she can't fit through there. And what you put that on there, and then you put another box. It's called a honey super. It's a little small, thin box. And the bees can go up and it store honey, but the queen can't get up there to lay eggs. So you'll get a box full of honey rather than a box with like part honey, part brood, the little babies, because you don't want to spin the babies out of there. You're going to lose bees and you'll have babies in your honey, and you don't want that. So I printed out this beautiful picture for you. So this is nectar that's stored in, that they're putting in, and they're drying it out. And so when this gets below 18% moisture, they'll cap it, and then it'll just be good. It'll be good basically forever, but they'll eat it in the wintertime. So, so because the bees have the floral fidelity and there's the flower fidelity, where they only go to really one source at a time together, and there's nothing else blooming, it's very easy to get 100% mesquite honey. That's not very easy where we are. Like, that's why sourwood honey is so expensive. Sourwood honey is produced in the foothills and in the mountains of North Carolina and wherever sourwoods bloom and are able to grow, and they tend to like to grow in colder environments. You can get sourwood honey because it blooms right at a specific time. And so what you can do is, when you know that the sourwood's going to bloom, you put that queen excluder on there and you put that top box, and you just leave it on there for like a week or two, however long the sourwoods are blooming, and then you pull it off right away. And that way, and you can put another one on. So when other things are blooming, you can get wildflower honey later in the season, but you get that sourwood honey like right at the beginning. And sourwood honey is a very light color, and it's very almost like, it's got like a caramel butterscotch notes to it, which are really beautiful. And so I highly recommend it if you ever get to sample sourwood honey. It is well worth the money. Because honey isn't honey. They're all different for different reasons. And the honey you get this year is going to be different than the honey you got last year. It's pretty spectacular. So I wanted to show you this other honey. This one is from Georgia. And if you can see, it's kind of like this beautiful molassesy color. This is gallberry honey. And gallberries are an ilex. It's like a holly, or an inkberry is another name for it. And it gives you this beautiful, like darker honey, and it smells like berries, which is really nice. So this has its own unique flavor, and it is like more caramely, in my opinion, than some of the other lighter honeys. So this one is very interesting. This is Manuka honey. So Manuka honey, this is a little more viscous. It's very rich in pollen. It has an odd smell. This is not one that I eat. I only keep it in my collection because it's interesting to talk about. But this comes from the tea tree plant. So in New Zealand and Australia, this is a very popular honey. And to me, it tastes like medicine. This is not something that I would spread on my toast. Some people really enjoy it. But the reason that it's so expensive is that all honey has the ability, when you mix it with water, it will create hydrogen peroxide in small amounts. And depending on what tree the bee has fed on, and the enzymatic action in its honey stomach, it actually will have between different kinds of plants, more of an ability to create more hydrogen peroxide. So Manuka honey is very popular for wound dressing, because when you mix water with this, or you put it on a wound, which is naturally going to have water, and it's going to draw water from the environment towards itself because honey does that, it actually creates a lot more hydrogen peroxide over time. So it's antibacterial. And of course, no bacteria and mold and things can't grow in honey. So when they put this on wounds, and this is the kind you eat, there's actually medical grade Manuka honey that you can buy online. And they also have it as part of wound care for MRSA infections and things when they can't use antibiotics on a wound, either because of allergy or, they've got some drug resistant bacterial infection on a wound. They will actually use Manuka honey, but it's medical grade. But go ahead and look that up because it's really interesting. But if you've ever smelled tea tree before, this doesn't smell like tea tree, but it smells distinctly medicinal to me. It almost smells like, I'm dating myself, but like back in the day when Band-Aids were made of rubber, it has like almost to me a tiny bit of a rubbery smell, but it does smell very sweet like honey. But I don't really like the taste of this one, but the story of it is completely amazing. So honey doesn't go bad because it's low in moisture. However, it will crystallize and turn darker over time. So this is some honey that originally looked like that. And this is probably, I would say, 6 or 8 years old. And what I had done is I heated it to get it out of a container, which turned it darker. And then now it's crystallized and it is exposed to air. So over time, it's gotten darker and darker. And I'll use this for baking. You can see it's totally crystallized, kind of crunchy, chunky, crystallized right there. It doesn't look good, but it actually is good, and it's still good to eat. Honey will, because it does have protein in it, will actually undergo the Maillard reaction, which are when you fry a piece of fish or something and you get the brown crunchy bits, or you roast a chicken and you get the brown on the chicken, that's a Maillard reaction. And so it's basically like a dry reaction. It's like when you dry out sugar or heat sugar in the presence of proteins, you'll get this Maillard reaction. Well, that happens very slowly year after year with honey. So honey will still be good to eat, thousands of years later. It's just that it probably won't taste that great, and it'll be really dark. So, but it doesn't go bad. Honey doesn't go bad. And I would never throw this away because, how many bees went through whatever they went through to get this? But this was from a few years ago. My, the very last part of the 5-gallon bucket that I had when I first moved here, I didn't want to waste it. So I melted it, put it in here. It was liquid for a while, and now it's totally solid. So if you ever want to make this liquid again, all you have to do is set it in a container of hot water. So I like to store things in mason jars because they can handle heat a lot better, and also they're airtight. So this is usually how I keep honey and all kinds of dry goods and things, but this could withstand sticking it in hot water. There are some glass vessels that do not, and don't pour boiling water around, say, one of those little bears, the squeezy bears that you get from the grocery store. I would just put that in tap hot water and give it time. It will eventually dissolve the sugar back into the solution, because it's a super saturated solution. So it will dissolve back into its solution. It's just packed with molecules of sugar, and sometimes it needs a little help to mix back up again, but it's perfectly fine to eat. Couple of safety things: never feed honey to a baby under 1 year old. And the reason being is that there are botulism spores all around us. And botulism, it can only come out of its spore and be alive if it's in the absence of oxygen, which is why it's all around us all the time, but it can't hurt you because there's oxygen everywhere. And if you swallow it as an adult, as long as it's not the toxin, botulism in food is a whole other thing. But botulism spores, if you swallow them as an adult who has, a healthy adult, you'll be fine. You have so many gut flora that it's not an environment that the spored botulism will come out of. It'll pass right through you. But for a baby that does not have the flora in their gut yet, it's a perfect environment for the botulism spore to to basically, reinvigorate, come alive, and start creating botulism toxin. And the toxin is what kills you. So, so just never feed a baby honey under the age of 1 year old. And then after that, it's perfectly fine. There are a few people that might have an allergy to honey, but it's very, very, very rare. And it's usually people who have had a bee allergy, and maybe they're getting some fresh honey that has like a bee stinger in it or something like that. But that's exceedingly rare. One other thing I want to tell you is that the idea that if you have allergies that you should eat local honey, there is no scientific research to support that. And the reason being is that when people have allergies, they're not allergic to the pollen that comes out of flowers. They're allergic to wind pollinated things. So ragweed and pine pollen and things like that. The stuff that, that bees don't really interact with. There's wind pollination, and then there's, bee pollination or insect pollination. And it's the wind pollination in order to, like for a pine tree to pollinate itself and make a pine cone with pine, nuts in it. Basically the stuff that's all over the cars in the springtime. And the reason there's so much pollen is because bees are not involved. And those trees are sort of more ancient plants. The way that they reproduce is they just release a ton of pollen and it blows everywhere. And then it eventually will find, the female part of the plant and then pollinate the plant with the wind, basically. So there's a lot of plants like that, and those are the ones that cause allergies. So you're not really allergic to the pollen that's actually in local honey. However, the placebo effect, there's a lot of research on the placebo effect, and it is very successful. So if you're eating pollen-rich, delicious local honey and it's taking your allergies away, keep at it, whatever works for you. So I'll go ahead and open it up to questions. I know that was a lot. There's so many things I could say about bees and honey, because I'm fortunate enough to be able to keep bees as part of my my job, to teach others how to keep bees. And so ask me anything.
Well, first of all, I have to tell you, I'm pretty disappointed about the allergy thing, because that was my excuse to eat honey every day. So thanks, Cheralyn.
Every day anyway, because it's amazing. And the bees made it for you.
So our first question is, how do I attract bees to my garden?
Flowers. Just have flowers. Bees will always find you. So it may not be the social bees that we, honeybees, it may not be them, but solitary bees they don't have to convince anybody else to all go to the same food source. Any flower that you put in your garden, you're gonna have bees on it. And if you're curious, the native pollinators are great, like Kerr Nursery, and there's a lot of nurseries. Just call them up, not the ones at the big box stores, but any of your local small nurseries, give them a call and ask them, do you have North Carolina native plants? Things like Echinacea and Rudbeckia and things like that. Like, you put those in the ground, you don't have to do anything. In fact, they grow by themselves. They love our clay, terrible soils. And then in the fall, I used to cut all the stuff down to make it clean, so then in the spring it would come up. And then I found out, actually, I don't want to do that. You want to let them stay there in the winter because there's dormant insects, and it's like an environment that they live in. And then right before they come up in the spring is when you cut them back. And then you don't have to do anything. They just keep coming back, and they'll be mobbed with butterflies, mobbed with bees. And you'll see some really cool bees. There's a lot of really interesting pollinators here in North Carolina, gorgeous insects.
That's pretty cool. And I'll make a plug. If you come to a cooperative extension event, which I'm sure we'll be having some soon, you can always get a packet of our pollinator
that is right. Thank you for putting that. I haven't thought about that in forever.
It's been a while since we got a chance to do that.
Yeah.
So the next question is, are there other things that honey could be good for medically for me?
Medically? Well, I mean, topically, it's fantastic. So, Chris and I were talking about these beautiful facial masks you can make. You can do honey in Greek yogurt. And that's a wonderful face mask. Like, full fat Greek yogurt you can buy a small little container of it, and that's like multiple masks. You can even steep a green tea bag for just a minute or less, and then take the tea leaves and mix it in with the yogurt and honey, and it's awesome. And I actually take a slice of cucumber and apply it with a cucumber and then stick it on my eyes. So I love that. My favorite body wash is A third liquid soap. I prefer Dr. Bronner's almond flavor, but you can use pretty much any. I like a natural soap like that. There's lots of them on the market like that. A third of that, a third honey, and a third glycerin, liquid vegetable glycerin. And it is the most delicious body wash or facial wash. If you know anybody that has really sensitive skin that maybe has like really reactive skin, or a baby with diaper rash or something like that, it's the most mild and beautiful. Just be careful of the soap that you use in it. Use some sort of liquid. They have like a baby version. You can use whatever, but just make sure it's very mild soap. And the vegetable glycerin and the honey are both, they pull moisture towards the skin, and it's just very, very mild. So those are the only two things. It's more like topical stuff, because even though there are some B vitamins and there's some, minerals in honey, it's still sugar. So, there's a lot of things that we don't know because they're not necessarily being studied. So I can't say like, oh, be careful of what you read online, because it'll say like, oh, it can cure this, that, and the other. And, this is not a substitute for medical advice. So, but there's no reason you can't enjoy it. It's not completely empty calories, but it is still sugar. So it has, 46 calories per tablespoon. But medically speaking, I know that mainly wound care is what honey has been used for. But I guess we'd have to see if there's any kind of medical research going on. I've only ever really read a lot about wound care. Yeah.
And our next question is someone who they lost the sound for a minute, and she asked if you could repeat what kind of glass we should not put in boiling water.
Oh, like a drinking glass or something. That's a thin, non-tempered glass. This glass is made to be boiled because these are preservation jars. So, these mason jars are just like not very expensive. They last forever. As long as you don't have tile or granite countertops, they'll survive falling on the ground on like, vinyl plank flooring or wood flooring. And they're standard sizes. So I put almost everything in mason jars because glass is non-reactive. So, but yeah, if you have like a regular drinking glass, in fact, our drinking glasses are the size that's in between these two. And we were doing that before it was cool. Like we just always did, because it's like, if you put it in the dishwasher, it comes out, it's like either a drinking glass or it's going to have dried beans in it. So it's just nice because I don't have to have 50 different kinds of things. It's like, everything has more than one use in my kitchen. So, but yeah, so mason jars or Kerr jars or whatever, it's just ball jars. No one brand is better than another. It's just they've got like all American brand. There's a bunch of different brands, but they're all the same.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question, and it's about something not honey related, but someone's written in to say that their okra plants seem to have all the leaves have been eaten up with lots of holes in them. What should they do?
I bet you, because they're all over the place right now, they're probably Japanese beetles. So if you see these shiny copper beetles, especially if there's holes in them, and they like to skeletonize leaves. So there's a couple different things you can do. Some people gross out on touching bugs, but if you put a pair of gloves on, because they're little, they won't hurt you. They don't bite. Just get a glass, like, or a quart jar of soapy water, just a few drops of soap in the water. And what that does is break the surface tension of the top of the water. Because if you take them and you just throw them right in water, they float on the top. But if you put a little soap in there, they fall to the bottom. And just pick them off. Or you can puff them with diatomaceous earth, which is basically powdered silica, and it will cut them. Anything with an exoskeleton, it's like microscopic glass to insects. It's fine, harmless to us, but it's not good for insects. And it's, and as soon as it rains, it'll wash off. It's non-toxic, but puff that all over. Then some people will put it in like a knee-high pantyhose. So it's this white powder, and then it kind of sprinkles. They get underneath the leaves, get on top of the leaves, and that's a nice kind of prevention. Just don't get it on the flowers, because then you won't get any okra, because it'll kill the bees. So don't sprinkle it on the flowers, just sprinkle it on the leaves. Yeah.
That's a really good information. Thank you, Cheralyn. Well, I think we are yet again out of time and out of questions, but we will be back next week with
fertilizer. I promise. I will remember next week.
We can't wait.
Appreciate you all for coming. Thank you. We'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks, Cheralyn. Bye-bye.
Bye.